Morning, let's kick off. Good morning, everyone. My name's Abigail and I'm Director at Compass Executive. I lead the People and Culture and Corporate Service practice and work across the health and care sector, supporting talent and diversity and inclusion. I'd like to welcome everyone here for joining us for what looks to be a really interesting and candid discussion around the topics of competition, culture and success. I'm also delighted to welcome our panellists. We have Suhail Mirza joining us, who is the author of the LaingBuisson UK Healthcare Workforce Report and a member of the board of New Cross Healthcare. Leake will be joining us. She is the People Director at National Care Group, the UK's leading provider of care and support services for vulnerable adults. Townson is also with us, CEO of the Homecare Association, the UK's membership body for home care providers, and also David Sayers, who's MD of Compass Executive, and as mentioned, with the UK's leading specialist healthcare executive search firm. Just to give a little bit of insight around what we'll be discussing this morning, the health and social care sector is at a key inflection point due to the huge challenges faced in recent years, where it's perhaps fallen behind its peers as well when it comes to competition, culture and success. The value of the sector to society is undeniable, as is its social impact. Historically, we've seen people attracted to the sector due to vocational calling, lived experience, and the reward their roles gives them. But perhaps most pressingly in the current environment, this social contracting goodwill may not be a viable option for those previously attracted to the sector and for businesses as we face those recruitment and retention headwinds. My panel is here to provide expert insight and solutions for us to reflect and take with us. Acting now is key. Progressive businesses and operators are creating strategies and taking action that is really rethinking recruitment and retention through an inclusive lens, creating strategies that work in this fiercely competitive market and structures that support long-term staff development, helping staff build really rewarding careers, and really the importance of talent and culture as massive enablers of innovation. So I'd like to introduce Mirza Suhail in a minute, and he will be discussing the importance of wellness, well-being as a strategy for retention, also as learning and development as a performance, as a strategy for retention. Also, Claire will share some really useful and detailed insight into an operational level where leadership development really plays a key role in a social care perspective, at cascading successful culture through a business and driving retention and shaping great environments for our services. Also diversity and how they're really working at the National Care Group with underrepresented groups, building environments for careers to flourish, and there's a particular focus there on citizens' trust. Townson will also share a lot of insight in the policy and external landscape, the sector workforce, and the implementation of the white paper. And David will also provide us some really good insight across the sector around diversity and inclusion, cultural intelligence, and how this really influences attraction and retention. So if I can pass to Suhail to start.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you for the introduction. A pleasure to be here. Yeah, as you said, there's a couple of key themes I would like to touch upon, but it's an extraordinary period. You called it an inflection point. The business language talks about a VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And I think we'll all agree when you look at the macro context, the labour markets are extraordinary, employment levels at record numbers, but huge uncertainty around cost of living crisis, because this is the pool from which labour needs to be drawn for the health and social care sector. When I did the LaingBuisson UK Healthcare Workforce Report, as part of that and continuing, I spoke to over 100 chief executives and HR leaders across the whole landscape. And the numbers are there. We'll hear from Jane, the shortages in social care, 165,000, the NHS, 110,000. These are not new issues. They've been around for a very long time. But the two big issues that are coming out for me in terms of how health and social care providers are responding in terms of the competition or the war for talent in the context of what's been called the great attrition or attraction, center around wellness and also learning and development. Now, wellness is a big topic. The Health and Social Care Select Committee reported on this back in June last year. It was chaired by Jeremy Hunt, who has a whole set of new responsibilities as Chancellor, as we know, with inflation now hitting double figures this morning, a lot on his plate. But he said burnout amongst the health and social care workforce was at an emergency level. And bringing that up to date, New Cross Healthcare commissioned a survey from YouGov, whose findings were reported a couple of weeks ago. And it's found that 38% of the care workers surveyed reported that their mental health had worsened over the last 12 months compared to 17% that had said that it had improved. So wellness and well-being is at the top of the agenda in terms of retention, in terms of attraction. All the stats show that if we're looking at the projections of the workforce, let's take social care, 490,000 new workers needed in the next decade to meet demand. We need to take account of the fact that Gen Z are going to make up 1/3 of the workforce, according to some projections, by 2030. And wellness, well-being, meaning, purpose is hugely important to that cohort. So what I'm seeing providers do are taking innovative steps to provide wellness and well-being for retention, but also in order to showcase their EVP. If we're all competing for talent, why would someone join a particular organization, etc.? And that's not just, of course, in social care, it's broader. The RCN has reported at the end of last year, 6 out of 10 of the nurses surveyed were considering leaving the profession due to the pressure of work. So that's the first theme. The second theme is the importance of learning and development. We'll all agree that we now have new job roles, new models of care as we transition to the new legislative environment of ICSs, integration, collaboration. But this will also require reskilling, upskilling, not just the current workforce, but also attracting new people to the workforce. And referring to the New Cross Healthcare survey, the care survey I mentioned earlier, startlingly, it found that 60% of the care workers surveyed said that they were asked to undertake tasks for which they had no training. So this is a vitally important subject, not just for leadership, because that's going to be important in terms of inclusion and in terms of a compassionate work environment, but actually at all levels. How are organizations going to meet that demand? And I'm seeing providers, the innovative providers, make learning and development, embedding that as very much part of the culture and the organizational culture, whether it's new roles, established roles. So those two factors, wellness, learning and development, I'm seeing as the fulcrum upon which the response to this huge labor shortage, the uncertainties around cost of living and supply chain, that context is important. And I look forward to sharing more about that from my travels and speaking with providers up and down the country.
Thank you so much for that. That was really useful, and really looking forward to hearing more as we go through the discussion. If I can welcome Claire, lovely to see you this morning, and I'll hand over to you.
Morning, Abigail. Morning, everybody who's joined us today. And it's lovely to be here and representing it, sort of from a care provider's perspective. I think it's pretty safe to say a number of us were all left reeling from last year's, sort of great resignation year. And I don't think that came really as any great surprise. So from our perspective, being a care provider, this year we've very much focused around our retention-based solutions. Obviously, recruitment is, sort of one of the headwinds that we're facing, and we're dealing with that separately with various strategies. But for us, it's about stopping that proverbial leaky bucket in terms of losing valued colleagues, and sort of also that investment in time and training, etc., that we put into our colleagues. So we've started it from the leadership level in terms of leadership development programs, really taking people back to basics of what strong people management practices look like, how important communication is amongst those teams, and how much ultimately our leaders and our managers within our various services have the greatest ability to really drive culture within their services and within their working environments to create, an experience from the colleagues' perspective that makes them, as sticky to us as they can be, given the amount of competition that we face. I think in addition to that, and Suhail's mentioned the wellness side of things, that's absolutely critical for us. So we've really developed a strong wellbeing strategy that we've then woven through a number of our, policies and our processes, from supervision and appraisal. So that's the front and center point of conversation in terms of people's well-being and all those various assets, but also through our absence management processes, spending a lot of time in terms of producing what we feel is a very progressive menopause policy and support package, where we're also covering the cost of HRT medication, for example. And, you know, that investment also in terms of training up mental health first aiders throughout our organisation, with the target of 1 in 10 colleagues being trained mental health first aiders, due to the level of pressure that, you know, our colleagues will be facing in pretty complex environments. I think in addition to that, we've also focused around that service-based induction piece. We see a lot of our leavers occurring in their first 6 to 12 months. And I think if we put more focus and more support and wrap around for our new hires, whether they're new into social care or even if they're, you know, sort of experienced social care practitioners, it's really important that they have that sense of support and development from those early stages so that we can set themselves up for success. In addition to that, we've also increased our communications channels, which I think many of us in this, you know, sort of sector sometimes find that as a challenge with so many frontline colleagues being out and about. How do we successfully communicate and reach all of our colleagues? So we've opened up channels of communication from the top down. So we have regular exec sessions where exec members make themselves available to talk to all colleagues throughout the organisation. It's that listening to our colleagues' voice. We've got a colleague forum, and we hold regular what we call tea and chats, so that we can hear our colleagues' feedback, suggestions. We can hear their grumbles and gripes and then respond to those on a real-time basis, in addition to your standard engagement or satisfaction surveys. The other piece, and Suhail also mentioned this from a leadership development perspective rather, is that how do we grow our support workers and, you know, really raise awareness of careers in social care and healthcare. So we've stood up an academy for that apprenticeship level and upwards. And that's another, you know, sort of really important aspect of having that grassroots level of development in terms of bringing colleagues up and showing them that there are multiple channels in terms of career progression within social care. And that leads me nicely in terms of also that aspect of diversity and inclusion. So it's really important to us that our colleague base really reflects the range of backgrounds and diversity of those that we provide support and care to. So therefore, we've developed a really strong partnership with the Prince's Trust, both in terms of supporting young people to get into the workplace. Obviously, we have a vested interest in terms of highlighting the opportunities available within our sector. But on top of that, we're also supporting through the Employability and Progression Monitor programme, which is a one-to-one level of mentoring and guidance that we can provide to 16 to 30-year-olds in terms of, you know, sort of showing, you know, sharing experience, providing that guiding touch. And it's a really fantastic element of personal and professional development that we can support our colleagues with as well. So I hope that's given a bit of a flavour of some of the areas of focus from a care provider's perspective. And I'll hand back over to Abigail.
Oh, that's great. And thanks so much, Claire. It was really interesting here about that kind of the stickiness piece and, you know, the area of listening to colleagues, that generational support that you're offering as well, and the grassroots development. So welcome, Jane. Lovely to see you. And I'll pass over to you now.
Thank you. Jake, can I have my slides, please? Thank you. So I was asked to give an overview of the policy landscape, and obviously there's been an awful lot going on and I've only got a few minutes, but just to highlight that we've had the Build Back Better report that was launched on the 7th of September, which talked about charging reform, followed by People at the Heart of Care, which I'm going to come back to on the 1st of December. Underpinning that, various policy papers about market sustainability and fair cost of care, which has an impact on the workforce because of it determines how much we can pay them and their terms and conditions of employment. There was also then in February a levelling up white paper, and then later in February an integration white paper, joining up care for people, places and populations. So Jade, next slide please. I just want to highlight that I'll come back to this slide in a minute, but there were workforce policy initiatives. Next slide. Funding and commissioning policy initiatives, digital and data policy initiatives, and the last one, various ones about system changes as well. And obviously that's a huge agenda and we haven't got time to cover it today. So I want to go back to the workforce one and focus on what was in the white paper. Now, obviously this morning we've heard that Jeremy Hunt intends to delay the care cap, the charging reforms. And we don't yet know how much of the remaining money will still be available once they've taken the scythe to the budget. But at the moment, as it stands, they've allocated 500 million. And the proposals are to create a knowledge and skills framework and career structure to support progression, to have funding for portable care certificates and some accreditation of those care certificates so that care workers don't have to keep doing them every time they change job. Leadership development and tailored support for registered care managers, a new digital social care workforce hub and skills passports, continuing professional development for registered professions, investment in social worker training routes, and well-being and occupational health support. Now, alongside that, there are many discussions going on about joint health and care workforce planning, one approach, the integrated care boards using a strategic framework that Health Education England is developing with lots of stakeholder engagement, putting more focus on local areas, ICS, places, considering what else is needed, including for the unregistered, unregulated part of the adult social care workforce. And then a new policy initiative that wasn't in the original white paper is about immigration and international recruitment. So a huge amount going on. If we focus on the ones on the left, I think there are many positive elements to these, but the elephant in the room is the fact that there is not enough funding. And it's all very well proposing knowledge and skills frameworks for career structures. But if you haven't got enough money to pay differential salaries, it's never going to fly. But it's the right thing to do, but we just need the funding behind it to support it. So I think many of the policy initiatives are positive in principle, but until we address the underlying issues of pay and terms and conditions of employment, I think we're always going to struggle. And on the equalities agenda, we've got many more women in social care than men. Today, it's been reported that there are more women leaving the workforce in general across the economy because of caring responsibilities, both for children and for older family members. And I think 27.6% of women are not working because of that, and over 7% of men. But the number of men leaving work to care for family is also increasing. So it's hard to see how the economy is going to grow unless we address social care, childcare, and put in place measures that really support everyone to be healthy and stay in the workplace. So I think I'll pause there and we can come back and discuss any of it later.
Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you. That's really, some great insight, and really look forward to digging deeper into some of those key areas shortly. So I can introduce David. Morning, David.
Abigail.
Hi, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too. Welcome, everybody. I want to just give you a very quick overview, really. I don't come from the healthcare sector. I spent a year with Compass as their MD. I was previously a partner in a boutique search business that specialised recruiting into the private sector and to the listed businesses. But I joined the sector a year ago, predominantly because I'm actually the vice chair of Mind and actually wanted to get more into that kind of healthcare sector. But what I thought might be useful is to share some insight gained from looking at sectors outside healthcare and what the sector could learn, maybe, I guess, in the kind of quest for new talent. I think when we look at ESG and diversity and inclusion being branded around quite liberally, but I think most organizations understand the need to have a more diverse workforce, but actually don't understand or don't have the triggers about how to actually achieve that. So Abigail and I have been working quite hard within Compass to look at what we call corporate intelligence. And around that is, I guess, businesses look around proportionality. And under that, of course, then all of the kind of protected characteristics that we associate with diversity, but more specifically, I guess, diversity of thought rolls into this cultural intelligence piece, which is around an organisation really being comfortable about their culture, how they present themselves, both internally and externally. So I think if we take one view, and certainly when we were just talking to Jane just a second ago, these are really turbulent times, and turbulent times need real leaders, and leaders with that breadth of knowledge of lived and learned experience, probably never more keener now to look really quite closely about where your next cadre of leadership may come from. I think if we look now around how we harness diversity, how we think about talent outside of sector, I'll give you a sort of brief example around how businesses need to maybe think more creatively. I was taking a brief a very short period of time ago for a new CFO in the care sector, and everybody around the table, because we're talking to the board, all came from healthcare, yet they were most insistent that the CFO also came from healthcare. And when I questioned as to why that was, what was pretty obvious is actually they were somewhat concerned around connectivity, and they needed to be better understood around transferable skills. And what they were actually saying is, we're frightened of this going wrong, and the comfort we get from hiring somebody inside of sector gives us that kind of protection. But what they didn't realize is, of course, is how narrow a pool that enables us to go and fish for talent in. But we talked about culture, and we talked about why the organization, what it stood for. And then what we really understood very quickly as a group, that actually there was a big attraction story to be told. And we worked very carefully with the organization and their marketing teams to present that organization as a real opportunity to people. And then what we did is, of course, then de-risked that kind of fit factor that everybody talked about. Now, clearly, I understand I'm talking about C-suite, C-suite -1 and leadership, but culture really goes through the entire organization. And I think your leadership have to reflect those values and therefore have to be really visible. So it's really important that individuals hired at that level really do continue to generate that throughput. I think diversity of thought is often very overlooked, but what we really want to do is really talk about authenticity in the recruitment process and really working quite closely to really make sure that we address your needs in that wider marketplace. So I think if I look at the private sector and compare it to the healthcare sector, which is the real emphasis of why I'm here today, there are some obvious learnings here. In my opinion, and it is my opinion, I'm sure I'll be challenged on this, and I hope to get some challenge on it. I definitely think that the private sector is far ahead, still nowhere close to delivering on this, but far further ahead in their willingness to take people out of sector to increase their talent pool than maybe the healthcare sector is. Now, I appreciate that's a generalism, but it's based on the following fact. I've got 5 current CFO searches that I'm working on at the moment, and all 5 are likely to go to CFOs out of sector. So that's showing to me that 1, there is now more of a willingness, but B, there's also a lack of talent, I guess, in that narrow sectors that we're looking at. And that's why we need to bring people in. So I think if I just come back to my final point is this conversation is around competition, culture and success. Well, competition, really your organization's only as ever as good as the individuals you hire. Culture really is the magic formula. It needs to work through all of your organization. If you get it right, it means people are not only attracted to you, but stay longer. And the success obviously follows on from that. So that's probably where I'd like to close there. But just to say that really my view is that in turbulent times, I think we need to think a bit more creatively, and it's on us as a recruitment partner to show you how that's possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you for sharing. So what I'd like to do now is welcome all of the panel back, and we'll open up our, for questions from our audience. Please be minded that you can upvote your questions. If there's something you really want answered, if you'd like to upvote that in the Q&A section, we can get that to the top of the agenda. What I will do is also kick off with a really interesting question that was posed to us prior to the event that I suppose sets the scene when we're looking at leadership and establishing that culture and people being drivers to change, in terms of, you know, individually what the panelists feel about, you know, how do you assess what impact a new leader will have on a care provider's culture, because, you know, there's the positive and the negative. So Suhail, if I can pass over to you first. Yeah,
I mean, that's a big question, which would occupy a massive amount of time. But I think the very simple way to evaluate that. And I've been involved with businesses now across this sector for 20 years. And I think it's a point that David makes, and that goes back to the culture and values. So the most important way that a leader is going to make an impact is the alignment of the values that they have, their track record demonstrates, and the company espouses. But why is that important? That's important for organizational effectiveness, but it's also important for attraction of talent, because all the studies have shown, all the work that I've been involved in the wider staffing sector, is that applicants at all levels, are clearly now keen to understand what the meaning and purpose of an organization is. Now that's, in a sense, almost implicit in health and social care, because we have that mission, but it's a wider, what makes that organization different? That, you know, strategy is defined as a unique mix of values. So I would look first always and have been involved in hiring for values, track record. And I think that ESG point that, again, David referred to, the S in that has got to be for social, but all stakeholders. And that doesn't, that all stakeholders relating to that now look to that. So if we're going to find talent, particularly at all levels, doesn't matter if it's leadership at senior level, C-suite, C-suite -1, at any level, we have to hire by values. And that will make the big difference, because that's the way that market, in a finite market currently, where there is a war for talent, absolutely makes the big difference.
Super, thank you so much for that. Claire, what would be your reflection on that question?
Firstly, it's a great question, and something that is certainly bandied around our team quite frequently. But from my perspective, I think in addition to what Suhail's mentioned, for me, it's around that visibility and accessibility to exec and, you know, senior leaders within the organisation. I think that's really important, that they are seen demonstrating those values, those behaviours, and driving those through their organisation, so that it's coming from top down, but also that they are accessible to every single layer within the business, so that they can be challenged and they can be asked questions on, you know, sort of certain aspects. And I think that for me just makes, you know, our exec team, our senior leaders, you know, people at their heart. And let's not forget, you know, the business that we're in is around care. I think that's really important, that all of our, for example, in our organisation, our support workers feel that they work for a company that cares for them. And that's demonstrated by the care and attention and conversations that they can have with our CEO, our CFO, myself, any of the exec members, but also in terms of how our direct reports then filter that through and cascade, and you know, the fact that we hold our teams accountable. And also it's that collaboration, it's making sure that we're all working as one team and that we're supporting each other, we've got each other's back. I think that's, you know, for me, that's a very motivating and inspiring, you know, sort of an environment to work in, when you know you're all working together, you know, sort of in support ultimately for the people that, you know, we are supporting within our business.
Fantastic. And we've had a few questions coming through, and you know, this you know, looks at the culture within organisation. You know, we talk about, you know, leadership and what development needs that might be there, but also, you know, when we're establishing a culture, and it's the behaviours, you know, behaviours that are established. I've been asked to ask, you know, what would be great to hear your comments about, you know, those underperforming employees and managers. You know, we want to retain, but also, you know, there's going to be people that we may have to exit out of a business. Can someone speak to that for me?
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think the first thing is, firstly, ensure that you've set people up for success. So we've just gone through a couple of years where we've been in a pandemic, we've been in and out of lockdowns. It's been quite difficult to actually get to see the, you know, sort of necessarily the whites of people's eyes. And I think that's been quite challenging. So for me, that's why we focused this year, which was around resetting expectations of what good looks like from our management, you know, everyone from registered and service managers and above, in terms of here's what we expect of strong, good managerial effectiveness. I think if after the support, clear objectives and expectations have been set, and people are still not meeting those, I think if there is any concern around toxic environments, closed cultures, you have to deal with those very quickly, because those environments can just very quickly get out of control. And as we've seen recently on the Panorama programme, that's not a healthy place to be. So for me, I would have no hesitation in the pain that you go through as a care provider when you lose a registered manager or any other leader or manager within a business. But if it's the right decision for that culture within the company or within that service, it has to be made very swiftly, contingency plans in place to replace that person. But for me, I wouldn't delay on making those tough decisions and moving people through the business.
Super, thank you so much. And Jane, you spoke around, the funding issues that we're facing in the sector, and how, the policy innovations there, but without the funding, it's very difficult to actually perhaps action things in organisations. In light of that, then we have organisations that are balancing those non-pay initiatives that they can do around wellness and culture, to embed that, perks that are non-monetary. Where do you see that being a benefit, and where can we maybe use that within this environment?
Thank you, Abby. I see Simon has put in the questions about sort of non-pay things, and I completely agree with him. In my previous role, we had a PhD student working with us who was studying what motivates care workers. And one of the findings of her research was that they feel motivated if they feel that they are cared for by the organisation to the same extent that they care for the people that they're supporting. So it's that alignment of care and culture all the way through. And then, I'm going to be provocative about the original question on how do you assess for leadership. I think in this regard, the recruitment processes that are used are an abject failure. I don't think they are able to assess those kind of skills in a way, unfortunately, that internationally statistics show that in the C-suite, there's a higher proportion of people with psychopathic traits than anywhere else in an organisation. And I think some of it is because, referencing these days is so, people are so concerned about litigation that they don't give proper references. We're not assessing people's ability to work in teams because it's all individual. So in one of my previous careers, so to your point, David, I've moved sectors various times, but we used to use assessment centres or development centres for assessing leadership potential. And you can do that once you've got people within the organisation, but recruiting them in, there are massive risks. And I think that we need to rethink or look at how we could do that much better, because, like it or not, the culture does begin at the top. And you can say all of the nice things you like lower down, but if you're being bullied from the top, it infects the whole organisation. So that's my provocation for today.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Abby, could I just pick up on that? Jane makes a very good point. Part of a recruitment process at any level in the business, you want to assess for fit. It's quite frequent, though, we ask a client about what is the discerning culture within their organisation. They struggle to give you that. And I think you can measure people against certain behavioural traits in a recruitment process. The organisation is unsure about what good looks like and what has been successful in the past. That's always a difficult place to start. But I think, the ability to say, well, look, if this has been successful here in the past, let's try and replicate it. Let's try and distill those factors and have that in the recruitment process if it's possible.
Thank you, David. And also, we've got a question from Claire Johnson around hybrid working. And what I'd like to tie that into as well is, we touched on earlier around the equalities agenda, more women are leaving the workforce, also things that, like the National Care Group are doing in terms of supporting women who are living with the menopause. What can we do? And there's various things, the future of work, in terms of new workforce models. Have you got any recommendations for managing hybrid working models? Are there other things that we can do that really support diversity in the workforce as well? If then we're looking at senior individuals, people not getting to those senior roles because they're having to leave the organisation. Are there suggestions from the panel on what we can do to address that? And also, as mentioned, manage hybrid working models.
I'll just pick that up briefly, Abigail. Working with providers across the country, and also to take David's point, in many different sectors. I think the ubiquity of hybrid working is here to stay. We've had clear indication of that during the COVID period, post-COVID period. So I think the way to manage that I've seen really good practice, is first that we welcome it and employers understand that this is now part of the landscape. So substantive workers that work full-time in an office can do so. People who prefer hybrid working for various reasons. This is a career choice that people have to honour, and employers have to communicate that they get that. Practically on the ground, the policies that will need to be adopted is to treat those hybrid workers, even when they're working remotely, as if they're in the office. So that means including them in all communications, and making sure some of the good practices I've seen that people have a physical check-in. What I mean by that, if you're managing a team, it's not just an email or a weekly get-together. It's also picking up the phone, this old-fashioned connection of actually hearing another person's voice. It doesn't have to be on Teams, doesn't have to be on Zoom. It requires extra effort, but that is the feedback that people feel. As we said, they need to feel valued, and they need to feel connected. And I think that's the trend I'm seeing more and more, whether it's a legal profession, energy, or healthcare. And I think that's vital.
And I think there's an interesting point there as well around those individuals that work in an environment where, you know, they're office based and they're able to have that flexibility in their roles. Can I ask both Claire and Jane what you're seeing in the market in terms of how you manage that within an organisation where you have perhaps your grassroots and frontline workers that aren't able to do that, and that feeling that perhaps they are not benefiting from some of the perks that they might perceive people in the ivory tower of a head office?
So just on that, it is a struggle because you have got, you know, the difference between support workers who need to be on site delivering care. There isn't a hybrid version of that. I think that one of the questions that came through, which was around what was the most requested perk that we're being requested from candidates, and for me, from what we're seeing, it's flexibility. So I think that's the ask on us as an employer, is about that work-life balance and that flexibility. So that's a challenge for us and our managers when they're looking at pretty long-standing rota patterns. It's forcing that change in terms of rethink. We've got candidates and colleagues who can do these hours. I know it might not fit your model, but how can we help you make it fit the model? Making sure, obviously, first and foremost, the people that we support are getting the support they need during the hours that they need it, but also just pushing for that change. And I think that's something that's definitely come out over the last year and a half in terms of that expectation that our candidates, when they're coming through the recruitment process, are basically expecting a level of flexibility from us as an employer. And certainly any office-based colleagues, they're definitely expecting a hybrid working model in place. And we've had that obviously in place since the pandemic, and we've continued to operate it with some robust guidelines for managers in terms of how to manage colleagues on a remote basis as well, rather than just leave them to it, but actually giving them, you know, sources of support in terms of picking up on some of those cues that you might pick up on in an office environment in terms of changes of people's behaviours if people are struggling, but how to do that on a remote basis as well.
Shall I come in, Abby?
Yes, thank
you. So like Claire, I mean, most of our members, obviously all of the home care workers, were out delivering care all the way through the pandemic. And actually they were some of the few in the whole of society that were doing that. You know, district nurses, GPs, social workers, CQC inspectors all went into remote mode, but home care workers weren't. So many of our members actually had their office staff in the office as well, kind of, you know, in solidarity, but just, you know, business as usual. But speaking a bit more widely across the economy, I know many leaders are very much struggling with this managing hybrid working, and I think some have got into a spot of bother by not providing enough clarity, so they've kind of left it too vague. Some people are saying, you know, don't bother coming into work at all, and Suhail mentioned earlier about the Gen Z generation. Honestly, we're finding in recruitment that some people are really put off by the fact that people are not in the office all the time, because they want to go for the contact, and particularly in your early stage career, you know, a lot of the younger people are perhaps in some shared flat, you know, with their laptop on their knee type of thing. So I think clarity is really important. I think insisting on team time, having team meetings, you know, at regular intervals. Somebody said that going to the office is like going to the gym. Like, you never want to go beforehand, but when you've done it, you're pleased. And so I think actually trying to encourage a bit more face-to-face contact is good. I do think everyone's mental health has suffered, and I do think some of that is about missing that contact. And it was quite easy for us all to get into a bit of a funk in the pandemic and kind of not want to go out again. So I think, you know, I do think the flexibility is good, but also that can create operational difficulties if everybody is so flexible that there isn't ever a time when you can get them all together to have a team meeting. So it's about trying to balance business need with the needs of the people drawing on services with individual staff needs as well. It's quite challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And if I can take an opportunity now to take a little bit of a step back and look at the sector more broadly rather than you know, from this micro. Suhail, would you be able to give us some further insight from the care survey on funding and give us that context now as well?
Yeah, there's a couple of points that come to mind, which speak to both what Jane and Claire mentioned. So the New Cross Healthcare survey that we commissioned YouGov. What was interesting on the funding point, Jane, as ever, is eloquent and impassioned around this subject, as she has been for so many years. But an interesting data point is that 55% of the people that we surveyed supported the idea of increased funding for the care sector, even if it meant an increase in taxation. And that included Brexit and Conservative voters. I'm just going to leave it out there. If the Chancellor's listening, it might be interesting. We found that. The other point that's important here, and it goes to the work that Claire's doing, 67% of the people that we surveyed who said they were interested in the care sector as a career stated that they didn't know how to find work in the sector, which is remarkable. So I think that speaks about the idea of advocacy across the whole sector, including the trade associations, including the government, to actually portray the care sector as something that's laudable, not just from a vocational point of view, but from a career perspective. And just broadening it out slightly onto the learning and development point, the hybrid working, which we have to be able to offer without a doubt, we must make sure that learning and development is a pathway and a career pathway that's multivalent. So it doesn't matter if you're working full-time, it doesn't matter if you're working part-time, you have the same opportunities within for learning and development as anybody else does. And I think that's one of the important points that needs to be made.
Thank you so much. So, and in terms of that, if Jane, we turn to some of the insight that you shared earlier around the workforce policy initiative and how that, you know, leads to, you know, where we're looking at this career proposition, could you expand on some of that for us?
Well, I was going to talk a little bit about New Zealand, actually, because what they did about 15 years ago was embark on a review of their community workforce. And it's taken a long time, and they've legislated in various different junctures. But what they did was they put in a knowledge and skills framework. So they, first of all, analysed population need and divided them into levels. So let's say level 4 with people with the most need, level 3, 2, 1. And then they determined what training, skills and qualifications and competencies were needed to meet those levels of need, and then put in the levels of training and skills and competence to do that. So they've got sort of level 4, 3, 2, 1 of training and qualifications, and level 4, 3, 2, 1 of need. I think that's a really good idea. And they then also put effectively different national minimum wages for the different levels, so that there was a guarantee sort of pay increase. And they also put in pay increases sort of legislated for them for years of experience. And then they went out into the schools and colleges and their equivalent of skills for care, and talked to young people about all of these different opportunities they'd have for career growth and development and learning. And they managed to attract more young people into the sector, and they were doing really well. They got national turnover in care staff turnover down from something like 34% to 22%, and then the pandemic struck. And their problem then became that their workforce is quite relatively old. So their average age was 54, ours is about 45. So a lot of the older ones retired, and then they closed their borders, so they couldn't get immigration. So they're sort of back to square one. But that idea of mapping out in a very visible and national way different levels, and actually, now there are all kinds of different opportunities. You can become a care technologist, you can do a nurse apprenticeship and train to be a nurse or a paramedic. You can grow in leadership roles, and certainly in the larger companies, they're no different from any other companies. Like David said, you've got finance and HR and IT and all of these other things. So I think it's the lack of a national framework. So I really welcome, what's in the white paper from that point of view. And I think it's really good to have accredited training at the care certificate level too, so that employers don't have to keep paying for retraining everybody, and that we have some standards there. But, we've got a long way to go. And the government is constantly using the excuse that care is delivered through the independent sector, not to help. But actually in New Zealand, the care is delivered by the independent sector as well. It's a very obviously a much smaller country, so it's kind of easier to make it work. But that model, I think, has a lot of potential for us here.
Thank you. Rosie Hurtley's asked a question in regards to what discussions are taking place at the moment with the Department of Education to reorientate education and skills in the country in terms of, again, looking at the care sector being an attractive proposition. Jamie, you able to elaborate? Yeah, you're able to elaborate on that.
Well, at the moment, the Department for Education is focusing quite a lot on apprenticeships, and that's fine. But when they changed the apprenticeship rules originally, they kind of messed it up, because they said you had to have 20% of time off the job. That has actually been changed now, but certainly in home care, it's more challenging to attract young people in, because we've got the driving issue, and insurance for driving cars is prohibitive. And also lone working isn't great for people when they're in the early stage career. Having that sort of peer support is really important. On the wider front, DFE it's more Health Education England, Skills for Care, Department of Health and Social Care, sort of working on these training and policy and leadership issues. We were disappointed because the General Sir Gordon Messenger was commissioned to do a leadership review, but he basically ended up more or less focusing only on the NHS. We did harass him quite a bit, and he understands completely. But we were saying things like the leadership training that ought to be done at a system level, not in individual silos. If we're really going to get joint integration and joined up working, we need to train people around on the ground in multidisciplinary teams, almost regardless of who their employer is, around the people that we're trying to support. And I think that would be a very good focus for the future.
Thank you. And Claire, you spoke earlier around the work that your organisation is doing around apprenticeships and the Prince's Trust. Could you expand on that for us?
Yeah, of course. We're early days in terms of the apprenticeship academy that we've set up, and unfortunately we've not had the traction that we would have hoped to, despite working closely with a number of colleges. I think we're starting from sort of almost the ground zero in terms of generating interest and understanding and awareness in terms of careers in social care. So that's our main focus at the moment, is developing those local education-based relationships, so that we can see, sort of encourage people, learners, to come in and either do work placements with us initially, or to join us straight from school. But as Jane mentioned, there are some complexities around that in terms of whether it's lone working and sort of where they're actually based. To the extent that we have services and care homes, then that makes life easier for us in terms of we can manage it, and we can ensure that they're not lone working. Any sort of new hires coming through that route. So so far we've got a couple of apprentices working with us, and we're seeing sort of very good feedback coming from them in terms of how they're picking up the role and developing and going through their qualifications. We're also, interestingly, we've hired someone through a 16-year-old into the people team. So she's come straight from school and she's going through the apprenticeship route there. So I think it's important to note that it's not just the field-based operational roles where we can offer these opportunities. It's in finance, it's in all the support roles as well, which is also interesting, and also speaks a little bit to David's point around How do you develop talent coming through your support functions? And also, from my perspective, also being someone who has predominantly most of my career is spent in the telecom sector, it is good to have that diversity of experience and background as well, but also growing your own and developing your own talent is really important as well. Mm-hmm. In terms of the work we're doing with the Prince's Trust, it's two-pronged. One, it's in relation to group settings, and so far we've started working in partnership mainly in the Stoke area, where we have a number of vacancies, and there's quite a big population there of young people who have, for whatever personal reasons, struggled to get into employment. And we're partnering with the Prince's Trust to support around interview skills and just employability skills. And part of that has also been workshopping with those young people to also offer them opportunities to consider careers and roles within social care as well. So we've been working on that side. And then the other aspect is this mentorship role that we're working with our leaders within our organisation to say, right, let's give something back to young people between 16 and 30, and how can we mentor them on a one-to-one basis, again with the whole purpose of supporting people to get into the workplace and understand perhaps how you balance some of those personal needs that you have in terms of work-life balance, childcare commitments or family carer commitments versus having a career as well.
Abby, can I say something? Sorry, I was going to say, I feel that our sector has been really slow to do things that some other sectors have been doing for decades. So, for example, when I was at university, some of my peers were sponsored by Rolls-Royce to do engineering degrees, with then the opportunity to go and work for them for at least 2 years afterwards. Graduates coming out of university now would love to have opportunities, and when you look at sort of the graduate apprenticeships, there aren't that many. One of my offspring has just finished, and why can't we have more of that? The Skills for Care did run some graduate management sort of training, but it wasn't as well organised as it could have been. And I think some employers may need some help constructing suitable ways of doing that, but we're really missing a trick here, because the jobs in care, that it's such a lot of fun, and a lot of people don't even think about it.
Yeah, Jane, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, and that's one of our challenges, is recruiting at that level, for managers. So getting graduates in who can then rotate around, whether it's they spend time within the operational side of the business, but then they spend some time with the commercial team, the finance team, the people team, the quality teams. They have that much more breadth to their understanding as to the support within, sort of the social care sector and within our business. That's absolutely the next thing that's on our list in terms of focusing. And I think we might have maybe a bit more success of bringing those graduates into our business, and that's certainly something I've seen in previous roles, of moving graduates around those various areas. We've seen, as you would with, lots of graduate schemes, the challenge is then holding on to people. But that's fine.
Thank you so much, both. If we can also turn our attention to some of the smaller providers, some small providers don't quite understand, have a struggle with setting what good culture is, because they take their cue from the regulators, and it's a question that's been posed. And Suhail, you may be able to give some great insight here. What more can we do? You've got that triangle of culture, but also outcomes and measures for the client, people enjoying their careers, but also, all aspects that are pertinent to care being provided. Is there anything you're able to share with us across some of your research, Suhail?
Yeah, well, I think the smaller providers, yes, there's going to be the bigger context, as Jane talked about. We've still got the funding issue. All of these initiatives require investment. But I've seen initiatives from the small and medium-sized providers that haven't required a huge amount of investment. So, for example, real-time engagement with their workforce in terms of temperature checks. There are now platforms and tools available to actually find out how people are doing, not through an annual survey or a monthly survey. This is around the retention point. It's really, really important. How is the workforce that's out in the actual field? How are they actually feeling? So I've seen a lot of initiatives, including in the NHS, but also in social care, where they've used tools and platforms to actually give managers a real time, literally a temperature check on how people are feeling. And that allows a sort of preemptive intervention for retention purposes. At the same time, I've seen people, organizations that have undertaken a wider view of wellness, engage people to deliver that inclusive wellness, and they've tied wellness together with inclusion. These two terms are often put into silos, but I'm seeing more and more organizations taking an inclusive approach to wellness and then putting that out on social media as part of their EVP. And it's all part of a matrix that says that there's a career here. We need, as Jane said, to make it a career that's attractive to graduates. That's a wider piece in terms of an advocacy, perhaps a wider skills workforce strategy that the government should look at. That's been advocated by people like the Recruitment and Employment Confederation. And in terms of learning and development, in terms of an example to tie that all in, how do we keep that attractive? How do we make that all encompassing? So New Cross, one of our missions is to be a learning partner for life. So we provide training for anyone, entry level and beyond, free at the point of access, even if you don't work for us. So I think innovative ways to showcase who you are and what you're able to offer allows people that are looking for something that's meaningful, because that's part of spiritual health, which is a big topic now around the world. That will allow people to stand out and differentiate their brands.
Abby, can I come in on the small business thing? So half of our members are small and medium enterprises. And I find it quite exciting because the barriers to entry in home care are much lower than they are in care homes, because you don't need masses and masses of capital. And I have a theory, but I haven't got any data to prove it. I keep asking Skills to Care for it, that there are a higher proportion of women owners and also people from non-white British backgrounds running home care businesses. And the smaller the business, actually, the easier it is to make people feel that they're belonging. And so in home care, the sort of small business model works really well. And I think in home care, we have quite a number of franchise organizations too. And that's like a really good blend, that you've still got autonomy as a business owner, but you have got support from an overall franchise organization that can, provide training and support and HR and finance help and all these other things. So I think you kind of get the best of both worlds there. But I would like to see some data, because I have a feeling that we definitely have greater diversity in the care sector as a whole than in the wider economy. But it feels in home care as though it might even be higher than the average in social care. But I need to get some data to determine that.
Thank you so much, Jane. And that leads on to some questions around diversity and also bringing people from non-traditional environments into the sector. So, I mean, the sector, has a diverse workforce, and that it perhaps at an executive level doesn't really represent the diversity at grassroots and within more junior members of the team, or perhaps even the communities that they serve. What is evident is that across the sector, this isn't there's not as many diverse leaders in the board. We've got a question for David around, the cultural risks and how they can be avoided, but also the benefits of bringing in leaders from out of sector into into all specialist care and as drivers for innovation, change and success.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. I mean, I think it's first of all useful to understand that recruitment has a degree of risk attached to it anyway. It's impossible to de-risk it completely. But I think it goes back to my earlier point. If organizations find it difficult to establish what their culture is, it's difficult to hire to the culture. So that's one. Secondly, is that actually transferable skills and lived and learned knowledge actually benefits organizations. I think that there's a real piece here around, we have to understand one thing, Abby, don't we? That we recruit 50 weeks of the year for our clients. We're professional recruiters. Most people actually recruit senior leadership positions maybe once or twice a year. So the risk quotient is much higher. I think what we can do is maybe, I dare say, hold their hand a little bit more around the features and benefits. The benefits are huge in the sense that you actually are recruiting for a far wider pool. So that means that, if you look at skill shortages and you widen the pool, We use an expression all the time, don't we, Abby, about let's not widen the gate and lower the bar. It's also about actually talking to more people, making sure the standards are hit, but actually thinking more creatively. So I think it's impossible to de-risk it completely. Hiring for culture is absolutely the right way to go to get that stickability factor. I think that's definitely in place. But understanding that there are transferable skills, you just have to think more creatively about it. And I think that it's the one thing that the sector could learn, that outside the regulated positions, Jane, where we talk about, governance and quality potentially in the CQC piece, where I absolutely understand the need to hire somebody in sector, but be more creative, work with a partner that can help you understand where creativity can lead to actually greater talent. And I think therefore you started to make real progress.
And I think also there's something around, and I'll let the panel around that culture clash thing as well. Perhaps organisations have a worry that bringing people from different environments may not be a benefit because they worry that those individuals haven't got the values, that kind of behaviours and traits that are deemed necessary to work in the care sector. So it's again about that kind of assessment of those behaviours and traits. So is that something that, as leaders in the sector, that concerns you when recruiting from non-traditional environments, that clash of cultures and individuals that might work in retail or hospitality having different drivers? If I pass it over to Claire first.
Sorry, just coming off mute. I wouldn't say that is a particular concern. I think the most important piece is, so it's understanding the existing dynamic within your team that you're hiring into. And I think there's no harm in hiring someone who is going to challenge that for the greater good of the team and the organisation. I think it is extremely important that you have clarity around what your values are, your mission, your vision as an organisation, and the culture and how you would describe that, both within the team and within the organisation. And then, so for me, it wouldn't be a concern at all in terms of hiring into, the exec team with people from other, which I would actually say relatively complementary sort of backgrounds, where they're used to high volume, change, turnover and things like that. People can pick up acronyms and terminology and quickly pick up the regulatory aspects that would affect their teams or how they, sort of support from a stakeholder relationship perspective. But it certainly isn't something that I would be worried about. But maybe I'm slightly different because I come from a non sector specific background as well, so I have the benefit of actually having gone through that transition, so understand how that works. Jane?
I've made successful hires into care leadership roles from other sectors, from retail, for example. The thing that people find most difficult in my experience, and I found this difficult too because I came from a different sector, is just that the care sector as a whole isn't as well served by business systems and so on as other sectors. So many organizations struggle because they haven't got IT systems that finance and can talk to HR and can talk to the care records, and you've got sort of and the software just isn't even there. I was looking around in 2014 at the time for digital cloud-based software for our home care business, and there wasn't anything to buy apart from in Canada, and I spent like 2 years trying to persuade this Canadian company to come here and they wouldn't. And then eventually somebody came along with something which we then spent 18 months helping them to develop, and then those businesses all get sold, and then the IT businesses, and I think we're just wasting so much time in care by not having decent systems, just like recruitment and all of that stuff, that the processes that are involved in that, hardly anyone, lots of people are doing that manually. Lots of people are, it's bonkers. So we need better investment in some of that. It's that kind of thing. So if you're in retail, you have so much data that comes off the tills. For operational management, it's so much easier, but you're kind of trying to manage blind half the time in care. So that's the kind of thing that people get frustrated with. Not the people side of it, because as you say, Claire, people have been in a people orientated business. It's not that difficult. It's not what we're doing. It's not rocket science.
Fantastic. And David, what are your thoughts on that, having experienced, yourself being new to the sector, and sitting both sides of that, I would suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned very quickly is the key to success for taking somebody out of the sector. And I'm looking directly at Claire now, because we've known each other for years and you've just done it, Claire. So hopefully you nod and agree here, is that the leadership piece specifically, you have to be really visible. You have to show that you care and be prepared to get into all operational sectors of the business. You have to understand that actually this business, or the sector generally, pivots to the care manager being the most important person in the organization and not the leadership team. And if you don't get that dialogue right, then you're set up to fail. So I think one of the things that I've looked at and real success is that individual that generally wants to do it, sees it as a value add, puts themselves out into the business, gets known by the business, becomes very visible and show they care. That's the key component factor that I've seen for transferable skills. They've got to have that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Also, I'd like to discuss, we've had a question around, and it talks to how we empower people, how we support individuals to build and have a voice in an organisation that can influence the culture and environment they're working with. Can I ask the panel, Claire, I'll ask you first, do you think we're doing enough to empower more junior members of team, or even if it's, people at different stages of their careers, so perhaps leaving for care needs, lots of different things to speak up and have a control over where their career is going?
Difficult question to answer from a sector perspective. I would personally say there's always more we can do. So we've very much focused on that this year by launching a colleague forum, asking for volunteers and making it accessible in terms of listening to our colleagues' voices, not just relying on feedback posted in our annual engagement survey, for example. So having sort of real-time opportunities to connect with our colleagues and get their feedback, get their suggestions, hear their concerns. And in addition to that, it's about having those regular open sessions with exec members, again with the same purpose, on a monthly basis. So there are various touch points. But going back to sort of Jane's comment, we need to use technology more as well to enable us to have those channels of communication, reach to our colleagues. We go nowhere without our phones on us nowadays. Our phones are permanently with us, and whilst we don't want to take our colleagues' attention away from delivering care, what we want to do is have a far better route of digital communication to our colleagues that give them the opportunity to interact with us as an organisation in the same way that they interact through Facebook, for example. So we're looking to launch a digital platform, which will be our engagement platform, purely with that opportunity to be able to celebrate and sort of reflect on amazing work that's done on a real-time basis every day, giving our colleagues the opportunity to mention things like sort of give fellow colleagues kudos and communications like that, impart important information and updates on a real-time basis rather than relying on a cascading effect coming through the organisation. So for us, and then also enable that two-way communication so people can comment and they can log questions and they can communicate easily. So for me, it's removing barriers to communication by giving people simple, easy, non-complicated routes to people that can support them and help them within the organisation, whether that's a big organisation or smaller, and also not just relying on a digital platform, but as David mentioned, it's pressing the flesh, it's going out, it's being visible. We have the ability to do that nowadays. We're not in lockdown, so it's imperative that we're all out there from top down, meeting our colleagues, spending time with them, listening to them, and not being sort of disingenuous and just walking around the surface and then walking out again, actually spending some time having a cup of tea and really listening, because our people, all of us, we're all feeling the effects of the cost of living crisis. So that for me is probably my biggest challenge and concern in terms of how that's actually affecting our people, and what can we do in the absence of raising pay rates. What else can we do to support our colleagues through these coming months?
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank all the panel and all the audience for their questions as well. The hour and 15 minutes has gone rapidly. It's been great to hear some insight and you know, it's those, like you say, removing the barriers to success. Those initiatives that businesses at different scales can do to retain staff, but also attract people into the sector at all levels. There will be a recording that will be shared with everyone later today. So that's great. So individuals can take some time to reflect on some of the great tips that have been shared. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and we look forward to our next event soon.